Hey guys, it's Presley. Since I'm going to be out today and I found out eighth hour decided that the flip lesson was the best way to go rather than using the textbook. So I'm going to run through this like I did last time. If it goes too fast, you can always stop, pause, rewind, go back, go over it again. I'm going to pick up where we left off yesterday. We left off with the assassination of Francis Ferdinand and how Austria gave Serbia a rather unreasonable ultimatum, and how Serbia had refused to give in to all the demands and offered to have several of them decided by a world court. Austria refused to negotiate and declared war. That same day, Russia had ordered troop movements in the direction of Austria to kind of back up their ally Serbia. So the rest of Europe was getting pretty nervous. To Germany, the movement of Russian troops towards Austria and German borders was an act of war. So Germany is going to declare war on Russia. That's the response. The German response is declaration of war on Russia. Russia is going to look to its ally France for help, but before France can make any kind of declaration, it gets pulled into the war because Germany declares war against it. So France fits in by Germany declaring war on France. But in order to get to France, Germany has to get there as quickly as they can, a blitz attack. So what they do is they go through Belgium and follow a plan by the name of Schlieffen. And the Schlieffen plan, Schlieffen is a German guy who designed this kind of blitz attack on France and throughout the war. So it's this move that pulls in Belgium's ally, Great Britain, into the mix. When Germany cuts through Belgium, Britain stands up and declares war on Germany for attacking their buddy. So at the beginning of the war, here are our teams. You've got the Central Powers, which are Germany and Austria-Hungary, against the Allied powers, Russia, France, Great Britain, and later Japan, Italy, and eventually the United States are going to join the fight. World War I is a different kind of war from the outset. Prior to World War I, war is glorious, heroic. Think of those stories of gallant knights and that triumphant return of the soldier, battle weary, but pretty much in one piece. World War I is going to change this. There are lots of new technologies, tanks, airplanes, poison gas, submarines, even the machine gun and barbed wire. The problem, though, is everybody has these, unlike the imperialism of Africa, where it wasn't really a fair fight. This is going to lead to that stalemate, that trench warfare of just kind of sitting around and waiting. Sitting around and waiting is not this glorious heroic warfare everybody was thinking of. It's pretty nasty. You're sitting in trenches, you've got disease killing off more people than wounds. In fact, 3 out of every 4 deaths for the Germans are due to gangrene and infection and disease, not from some heroic bullet wound or something. So there's this kind of cynical look at war, and a lot of the writings that come from that time show this kind of irony. You think of the writings of Hemingway or even that movie All Quiet on the Western Front. You have this kind of cynical look at war now. This link here at the bottom, I'm going to put a live link in the comments section when I post the video. After you finish the notes, come back to this link, and what I want you to do is using the extra time you have in class to play this game the BBC put out. What it does is kind of sends you on several trench warfare type missions. And if you finish a mission, take a screenshot, keep track of it, and we'll do a point thing later where you can replace your trench warfare game for a different assignment. 1917 becomes a really important year for the war because the focus of the war shifts from land, because everybody's stuck in these trenches, to the sea. The German policy of unrestricted submarine warfare wasn't new in 1917. They sank the Lusitania in 1915. You remember that whole thing. But your American history teacher may have told you that the Lusitania drugged the Americans into the war. It didn't quite yet. It was one of many things that piled up. The Germans were using unrestricted submarine warfare in order to hopefully starve Britain into submission. They gambled that the goal could be accomplished before the U.S. actually got involved, because they knew the U.S. population was really kind of against getting involved. In March of that year, Russia is going to withdraw. There's a lot of civil unrest. There's a lot of war-related shortages of food and fuel. Tsar Nicholas is going to have a lot of trouble. We're going to come into more detail about that later, but just know that Russia pulls out of the war, World War I, in 1917. The thing that really pulls the U.S. into the war is the Zimmermann Note. You probably remember this part from your American history class. Arthur Zimmermann was a German statesman who sent a telegram to Mexico promising them aid in helping them reconquer the lands they had lost to the U.S. in the Mexican-American War, if Mexico would ally itself with Germany. Hopefully your American history teacher explained that this telegram was intercepted by the British, who quite happily sent it over to the U.S., where it was publicized in the papers, and really your first real example of yellow journalism. That gets the Americans all fired up into getting involved, and in April of 1917, the Americans officially get involved, and the American doughboys arrive to fight in World War I. World War I is the first really total war. By definition, a total war is when a country devotes all of its resources into winning a war. Governments are going to take control of all means of production. Nearly every able-bodied citizen, male and female, is put to work. Unemployment all but disappears. That's the good thing. There's no unemployment. One of the negatives is rationing. Civilians are allowed only a small, limited amount of a good that would be needed for the war effort. So we're talking things like rubber, meat, sugar. It also means rationing in the sense of opinions. Governments are going to put a lot of restrictions on any kind of anti-war effort, sometimes in a really harsh way. And one way they use to control this is propaganda. Propaganda, you should know, is one-sided information designed to get people to back you, form an opinion that you want them to form. Governments are really worried that honest reporting of the war is going to turn people against it, so they censor the news. Women are going to have their first real big push for the war effort here. You're going to see more of it in World War II, but in World War I, total war means relying on women to fill the holes in the workforce left by taking the men off to fight. One of the things that's really going to affect everyone is the Spanish flu. In 1918, the Spanish flu is going to hit Europe. It's going to come back over to the U.S., and by the end of this kind of year of flu, 20 million people worldwide are going to die from it. When we talked about the bird flu a few years ago, I don't know how much you remember that, the avian flu, there was a lot of fear that it would turn into the next Spanish flu. Okay, obviously if you didn't know the Allies win, this was quite a spoiler, but you've done this before several times. It's really touch and go for a while there in 1917, 1918. Germany had advanced as close as 40 miles to France. This is largely due to the withdrawal of Russia. It allows, when Russia withdraws in 1917, it allows Germany to fight a single-fronted war. The problem, though, is their troops are exhausted, supplies are low, and the Allies know this. So with the help of 140,000 fresh American troops, they push back. The Allied advance is going to take them all the way into Germany. By July, the Germans are on the defensive, and their allies are starting to fall apart. The Central Powers are crumbling. First the Bulgarians, then the Ottomans are going to surrender. In October, a revolution is going to sweep through Austria-Hungary, so they're out of the war. So by early November, Kaiser Wilhelm steps down, and the new Republican government in Germany is going to sign an armistice 2 days later, which is why November 11th is known as Armistice Day. In the U.S., this is celebrated with parades in the street and the whole bit. So the question always comes, what is the legacy of World War I? World War I is the first new war, these new technologies, this new grand global scale of death, destruction, at a level nobody had ever really seen before. You have to keep in mind that the medical care of World War I is equivalent to the American Civil War. The only real solution to an injured limb is to amputate it. Gangrene causes a huge amount of deaths. They're just now beginning to understand antibiotics. Antibiotics are discovered at about 1900. They're just discovered then. So by 1918, they're still a new concept, and a lot of people don't really have access. Then you add the economic cost of the war. National treasuries of Europe are completely drained. Farms, towns, homes are destroyed. So much of what might have been used to rebuild Europe is in ruin, and they're going to have to rely on outside help, namely the U.S. which is going to work for a while, but then we have our own problems with the Great Depression. So there's a series of treaties that help end the war. There isn't just one. There's several. But the most famous of these treaties is the Versailles Treaty. And the big four that help decide this are Wilson for the U.S., France's George Clemenceau, Clemenceau for France, David Lloyd George for Great Britain, and Italy's Vittorio, Vittorio. Remember, Russia would normally be there, but they're in the midst of a civil war, so they're not represented. They got their own problems. So these four, Wilson, Clemenceau, David Lloyd George, and Vittorio, are going to design this treaty. Wilson comes with his ideas of the 14 points that have to do with treaties and, open seas, fairness in colonies, a lot of self-determination. And his last, the 14th point, is this association of nations that would try and avoid a world war in the future. The problem, though, is France and Great Britain show up expecting to get money and colonies as a way to pay for the cost of war. And Italy is looking for the piece of the pie, too. So there's some very different goals as to what this treaty should do. And it takes months. Okay, so at the end of this treaty, Germany is found solely at fault. They're left with shouldering the sole blame for causing the war, and they have to have this war guilt, these reparations, these payments. The problem, though, is their industrial areas are confiscated. They lost their colonies, they lost the Alsace-Lorraine area. So their ability to financially pay for these reparations, which are to the tune of $33 billion in 1918, that's an insane amount of money then, it's almost impossible for them to pay this. And these new nations, quote unquote, that were colonies of Germany aren't really nations. They're not self-determined. They're under the control of the Allied powers of France and Great Britain, so they're treated much like colonies, protectorates. There's a lot of negative feelings of the natives in those areas towards Great Britain and France. So this peace is not a very solid peace. It's often referred to as built on quicksand. All right, these major provisions, the League of Nations, territorial losses, the military restrictions, and the war guilt. I left this already filled out for you because I want you to use it later. Cough, cough, hint, hint. There's going to be some sort of question that asks you to go into detail here. So read through it. If you've got questions, let me know. But you're, in high school, I think you can read for yourself. All right, that kind of ends the notes for this point. We're going to go into Russia next. But when I see you tomorrow, hopefully the weather's nice, and hopefully we'll get to play dodgeball to represent trench warfare. Not true dodgeball, but kind of a variation of it. So wear comfortable clothing in the hopes we can go outside, and I'll see you then.